Hi guys, a question. Why does Reform UK get more airtime than the Greens, the SNP and the Liberal Democrats all put together? Anyway, Richard Tice, one of its MPs, appeared on the Trevor Philips show on Sunday to demonstrate why that shouldn't be happening. He was asked what his party would be doing if they were responsible for the budget this week, and Tice tried to dodge the question but eventually ended up pushing for austerity. Then he claimed that immigration is a priority amongst the British people, which it isn't. Terrible stuff. Have a listen to this.
Let's play some fantasy football. Imagine that you are Chancellor in a Farage-led Reform government. What would we expect from you on Wednesday?
Well, what we're going to get on Wednesday, I fear, is the most socialist budget in living memory.
Okay, it's not the most socialist budget in living memory. It's probably not even a socialist budget, because a socialist budget would result in massive investment in public services. Now, it seems that the NHS will get a 5% boost in spending, but other departments will probably see cuts or will be asked to make cuts. How is that a socialist budget?
I think it'll be an assault on jobs. I think it'll be an assault on small businesses, on entrepreneurship, on hard work, and that will end up being an assault on growth. And we're in a crisis. You can't tax your way out of a crisis. You've got to grow your way out of a crisis. And that means reducing the size of the state. There
you have it, austerity. Reducing the size of the state is a code word for austerity. Because if you reduce the size of the state, you have to reduce the size of government departments. Public services get cut. Now, he seems to think, well, the best way to grow the economy is to reduce the size of the state. Well, the Tories have been doing that over the last number of years. They have been imposing austerity, cuts to public services. And how has that grown the economy? It hasn't. So how can you grow the economy by imposing more austerity?
And motivating people with hard work, taking risks, setting up businesses, being an entrepreneur, and that's how you get growth in the economy. Instead, we're going to get a bigger state, more bloated, more inefficient, and with outcomes, frankly, that are not commensurate with the money that's being poured into the public services.
Well, I noticed you swerved past my question about what you would do, but let's talk about them.
So let's talk about let's come on to what we would do.
Well, no, let's just deal with them. They have said that growth is their central objective, correct, but they can't even get to that point until they've sorted out the public finances.
You can't grow an economy if you tax everybody to the hilt, to the point where...
Not everyone is being taxed to the hilt. This is the point. The richest in society are not seeing their taxes rise. Now, there's talk about increasing taxation such as capital gains and inheritance tax, but we haven't seen that yet. Once again, it's all speculation. But you're talking about cuts to public services and saying that's a way to grow the economy. We know that if you want to grow the economy, you have to pump money into it. Because if you pump money in, then small businesses will spring up around that. You will see private investment as well. But Richard Tice doesn't want to see that, it seems.
Actually, it doesn't pay to take hard work.
But they're not going to tax it. They're not taxing working people.
So they say. Let's wait and see. If you freeze personal tax thresholds, if you put national insurance up on employers, all of these are taxes on working people. If you tax small businesses, you talked about the Federation of Small Businesses earlier, more, then you diminish risk. I'll give you an example. There's a roofer I know in the Cotswolds. He had 28 people in his business. It's too hard. The risks were too high. The grief was too much. He's gone down to 2. That's just one example of people saying it's not worth the hassle employing people, all the new regulations, all the new taxes. That is a major inhibitor on growth. The public...
Okay. Does anyone actually believe this story? A roofer, 28 employees, let 26 of them go, now only has 2 because of regulations. So I would love to ask Richard Tice, what regulations are you talking about? Did you actually ask this roofer? Can you tell us some of these regulations that have forced you to lay off 26 people? What taxes have been introduced that have forced you to lay off these people? Remember, Labour have not introduced any taxes yet. So this will be a criticism of the Conservatives, not of Labour. You can't blame Labour over this. They haven't even introduced their budget yet. But does anyone actually believe this story, or do you think it's something that was extracted out of maybe Nigel Farage's behind?
The public sector doesn't create growth. The private sector creates growth. But that's why what we should be doing is we should be saying...
No. The public sector stimulates growth, and then you hope to see growth as a result in the private sector. So they have to work in tandem, or they have to work in parallel, or even in sequence. The public sector injects money, for example, builds a bridge, builds infrastructure, and then the private sector benefits from that, and this creates growth. But you need the public sector first of all. You can't rely only on the private sector.
Saying no, you've got to reduce the massively inefficient, wasteful government spending all over the place.
There are lots of reasons why your roofer might have got rid of 25 or 26 including, by the way, the absence of growth under the previous administration.
And growth is falling. And that's why we were very critical of the previous administration. I mean, they're no friends of ours. So we've got to create growth. And I repeat the point. You cannot tax your way out of a crisis. You've got to grow your way out of a crisis.
Well,
but how? How do you grow your way out of a crisis if you're not going to increase taxation in order to fund public services and investment, public investment? How are you going to achieve that?
This government talks the talk about growth, and then I fear that we're going to have an assault on all of the things that create growth in this forthcoming budget.
See, it's very easy, once again, for the likes of Reform UK to sit on the sidelines and say, you're doing it wrong. So if Labour are not able to produce growth, they'll say, well, the reason was because taxes were too high. If we had reduced taxes, then we would have seen growth. But there's no evidence to back up that claim. You need money in public services. If there isn't money in public services, then you're not going to see growth. It's as simple as that.
I know you guys are never going to be wishy-washy in your criticism, but let's talk about what you want to do. In your manifesto, I seem to remember you projected cuts of something like 50 billion or thereabouts?
Absolutely.
In government spending. Let me ask you the question. What would government stop doing?
Well, interestingly, having now been elected to Parliament, and with whistleblowers coming to me, frankly, those savings are more than achievable. Whether it's just the inefficiency and the waste. It's the inefficiency, the waste, the abuse of public money. It's everywhere.
Tell me one.
It's everywhere. What I said before is...
He can't come up with an example. He can't come up with even one example. One example of what you're talking about. Because as soon as he explains one example... whether we actually believe these whistleblowers have come and explained these things to Richard Tice or not, as soon as he describes one example, it will fall apart because it will be scrutinized. See, is there waste in the public sector? Probably yes. Does it equate to £50 billion? Probably not. Okay. Now, it's also important to remember, and I've mentioned this before, and Richard Tice doesn't seem to understand this. In the public sector, you have to have contingency. You have to have redundancy. Now, that's a cost. So and I've mentioned this, for example, in the NHS, you need to have doctors and nurses standing by in case there's an emergency. We saw it during the pandemic. If you don't have that, you're going to have serious problems because these are public services. They're not private companies. Private companies would see that as a waste and they would get rid of it. They don't want contingency. The opposite of contingency is just in time, which is strange because you have Brexit here trying to... Anyway, never mind that. But in order to have a fully functional public service, you need to have contingency, you need to have redundancy to deal with problems. It's built in because it's a public service. It's providing stuff to the public. Services to the public. It's not a private company that's focusing on reducing costs to maximize profit.
In your household budgets, in business budgets, you're saving £5 and 100. Right? You say the same to all public sector workers. You've got to stop wasting money, re-procure, and it is legendary.
This is nonsensical. He can't even come up with one example of waste. He's just saying, well, what we do is we'd force government departments to save £5 in every 100. Make a saving of 5%. Okay, but what does that mean? How do you achieve a 5% saving? And what does a saving mean? Because a saving is different from a cut. Because you could cut something And then it would have an impact later on, in another aspect of society. Or what we can do is, if we cut the budget for benefits, for example, we could do that and make a saving. Yes, but what would be the consequences of that? Oh, look, we spend a lot of money on A&E. What if we reduce the spending on A&E? We can make a saving. But what would be the consequence of that? It's ridiculous. This guy doesn't understand how public services work. He doesn't understand the value of public services.
Everywhere. That number is a small number. The other point, you had Lord King.
Hang on. Stop for a second. If I save £5 and £100 in my household budget, that probably means that the family doesn't get a holiday. I'm asking you, you're going to save £5 in
a holiday is quite trivial. It could mean that you're not able to put petrol in your car. It could mean that you're not going to, heat your home. It's not just about something trivial like a holiday. It could have an impact in a very negative way in another part of your household budget. But we shouldn't be talking about household budgets because that's a separate thing.
100 out of the government's spending, what aren't we getting? Fewer border guards for example, in immigration?
Last weekend it was
fewer police, fewer soldiers.
You've asked me a question. Let me answer. Last weekend it was reported that the fraud in the benefit system was £7 billion.
See, here we go. Going after the poorest in society, the benefit system, fraud in the benefit system. What we're going to do is we need to punish people on benefits. They'll claim that they're going after fraud. How much would it cost to go after the so-called fraud? Because if the cost to try and clamp down on fraud is more than the money that you would bring in, then that's a waste. How can you justify that? But he would be justifying it from a political point of view. So once again, Reform UK are not a party of the people. They're a party of the rich, designed to reduce the size of the government to benefit the richest in society.
It's a multiple of that. It's probably 30, 40 billion. Fraud in benefits alone. I get doctors and nurses coming up to me almost every week talking about the waste and inefficiency in our healthcare system. It is everywhere. 50 billion is easily achievable. The other point, you just had the former Governor of the Bank of England in. We should not be paying voluntary interest on all the printed money, which is £30 billion plus a year. Economists now agree with me. That's serious cash. That's how you grow out of a crisis.
I know this was your point about quantitative easing and so on, but okay, all right. Let's move on. The big story in, I guess, your bailiwick, the immigration question this week has been that the number of people crossing the channel on small boats so far this year exceeds the entire total for last year. Now, this was a big issue for you in the election. How would you stop that?
It's a big issue for the country. It's almost the number one issue.
No, it is not. The number one issue is the cost of living crisis. It could also be argued the number one issue is the NHS. But it's cost of living, NHS. Immigration is somewhere maybe third, fourth, or even fifth, depending on who you ask. Now, it's a priority for Reform UK. It's a priority for a number of Conservatives. But that's where it ends. And I've mentioned it before. It's not a priority of the British people. See, we keep coming back to this point. Why is Richard Tice on Sky News? Why is Richard Tice interviewed on the BBC? Why is Richard Tice interviewed on Good Morning Britain? Because all Reform UK really have is immigration. And they're keeping this issue alive thanks to the media. Why was somebody from the Liberal Democrats not interviewed? Why was somebody from the Green Party not interviewed? Why was somebody from the SNP not interviewed? They have more right to be there than Richard Tice. But for some reason, Reform UK are constantly given a platform to make ridiculous claims and convince the public that their priority is not the NHS or the cost of living, but immigration. And unfortunately, the media continually giving them a platform eventually convinces some people that actually maybe we shouldn't be worried about the cost of living. We should be focusing on immigration instead. This is how these things happen. This is how Brexit happens. This is how Boris Johnson happens. The media platform the wrong people, and the public are convinced to vote against their own interests. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.